Are you fascinated by true crime like us?
If so, check out our podcast, Crime Divers, hosted by me, Jill.
And me, Laura.
Look out for new episodes every Tuesday when we discuss true crime from around the world.
So what are you waiting for? Come join us as we dive in.
This is Beth Darlington, paranormal investigator and owner of Access Paranormal, and you're listening to the fabulous Al Cooley and the Ghosts in the Valley podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Ghost in the Valley podcast. I'm your host, Al Cooley. Today I'm going to look back from the Berkshires UFO episode that was released on Netflix on the Unsolved Mystery series. Today I'm going to do something a little different, go a little bit outside the Berkshires, also into Pittsfield, Massachusetts, because the UFO didn't just go through the Berkshires, Great Barrington. I mean, it was all across the northeastern part of the United States, from Canada down through Massachusetts. And I have Tom Warner back today. Give me some updates on what's been happening to him since the release of the Berkshire's UFO series, with over 150 million views. So I'm going to start off the show with Joe Durwin, and he is a journalist and author from Pittsfield. Joe's going to share a few of his stories and research and from the area. And then the second part of the show will be Tom Warner making a return visit. We got a very busy show today. We'll get right into it right after these brief messages.
Are you interested in all things paranormal, ghosts, EVPs, cryptozoology, and the history behind the legends we all love, but you don't have an hour out of your day to listen to another podcast? Well, then you should listen to Ghostly Paranormal, where we talk about all of those subjects and condense it down into 15 minutes or less. Check out Ghostly Paranormal.
Okay, today I have Joe Durwin. He's from the Pittsfield, Massachusetts area. He's a journalist, author, blogger. Welcome to the show, Joe.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for sending me your link. These Mysterious Hills. That was very interesting.
Yeah, I have a good time covering the local kind of weird beat.
I seen on the very beginning, at the intro, 75 years of UFOs in the Berkshires, July 4th, 1947 to present. I love the way that started out. 75 years ago.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting anniversary year, for the region, and I think for the kind of international community in a lot of ways, because you have that 1947, Kenneth Arnold flying saucers, the Roswell crash, all this just kind of explosion, and of course there were reports of things in the sky before 75 years ago, in the Berkshires, like other places, but this kind of way of this awareness of of it, and framing it as a an unexplained phenomenon that needed to be paid attention to. It really kind of blew into the national consciousness 75 years ago this summer, and recently has kind of re-emerged in legitimate discussion, with these congressional hearings and things like that. So it's all interesting timing to me.
I was looking at this, and it says it starts on June 24th, 1947, when pilot Kenneth Arnold spotted 9 disc-shaped objects near Mount Rainier in Washington.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, you don't just spot one, you spotted 9.
Yeah.
And so many other people from the region also seen it.
Yeah, it was kind of this, as near as I can tell from the contemporary newspapers from that summer, it was, the reports must have been in the thousands nationally, because you look at, if you go in and look at any region's newspapers online and you search like saucers and something, there's a kind of this just spate of, for a couple of weeks in June and July, there's just, there must have been literally thousands. And then it sort of, has kind of ebbed and flowed since then. There's been, kind of peaks of interest and then kind of these dry patches.
Yeah, and I've seen that, it's 1947. Was that the year that the term flying saucer came in?
I think so, because there had been talk, during World War II, there had been kind of talk of Foo Fighters and, mysterious lights seen during the war. But then I think it was actually a newspaper that coined the flying saucer term, because I believe Kenneth Arnold said, a round object, and nobody had seen a kind of drawing or anything of his sighting yet, but I believe there was a newspaper that coined the term, and it stuck. It really caught on in the popular imagination.
Also, part of that article was the peak was, that came on July 4th in Pittsfield, 1947. With so many people seeing, the saucers at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's the point, kind of locally, where you see the first, mass. Maybe not mass, but I think there was 4 witnesses, during the 4th of July parade, and then 2 other points in Berkshire County, 2 other locations that people had reports from that same weekend. So it really kicked off, and it was certainly something our local newspaper of record gave great amounts of attention to. So they really, over the years, whenever people had sightings, they didn't necessarily endorse them, but they almost always covered them. That's useful to me.
You are a journalist for the local newspaper?
Currently, I am engaged in, I do property history for homeowners and commercial properties. I kind of find out who died in your house, sort of thing, for hire. But I've been a news reporter and columnist for several different local media outlets over the years. Going back to my column, These Mysterious Hills, my original column, kicking off in 2004 with one of the local weekly newspapers, and so it's taken different forms, and I've explored web, print, radio, different ways of, navigating the landscape now, and just getting, because it's really about interacting with the audiences, because that's where all the, most of the amazing stories that I've come from leads from readers over the years. I'd put my email at the beginning, the end of every column, and it's kind of like, we're willing to believe, we're ready to believe you, kind of thing. And it's like, who are you going to call? So just to get in touch, and people did, and so I'm still finding whole new fascinating stories from our area, and monster sightings and haunted houses that I had never heard of before, even after years of doing this. So that's been great.
Yeah, I didn't even know about the Berkshire area, to tell you the truth, the Berkshire Mountains or Great Barrington or Sheffield or Pittsfield, until I actually seen the documentary. It was on Netflix on Unsolved Mysteries.
Yeah.
And I seen how beautiful that area was, and my wife and I plan on going to the Berkshire. Well, we plan on going this year, but we had so many setbacks. So we're gonna make it next year.
Yeah, travel is tough right now.
Yeah. So what's the name of the newspaper you?
So I first wrote for the Advocate Weekly. I also wrote for the North Adams Transcript, and for a long time I covered the Pittsfield beat for Berkshires, which is the online kind of hyper local online media outlet. So so that was that was a kind of different weird, where they're paying me to go to city council meetings and zoning boards of appeal, and which can be almost as weird as chasing UFOs and haunted houses on a good night. But So it's just kind of a different perspective of the community. And but my background was in anthropology, so I just sort of fell into writing, and my interest locally had been predominantly in folklore, and just collecting all types of narratives of how people saw the community. And I think that's still, I'm kind of still tracking and watching the changes. It's interesting that, when you talk, you mentioned visiting the Berkshires and tourism, things like that. I think one of the reasons why the Berkshires doesn't have the kind of reputation of, say, Salem or Roswell or something like that, even though historically we have that fertile ground. But there's been, I think this concerted effort to keep our history kind of sanitized for different kind of tourism. We've been a cultural mecca with the Boston Symphony Orchestra here in the summer, and the theater, the local theaters. So there's this kind of huge arts economy, going back to the days of Hawthorne and Melville and all these folks that lived here, that doesn't always feel compatible with the huge number of UFO sightings, the many cults we've had living here, the tremendous number of unsolved murders over the last couple of centuries. So so I think even though we have kind of maybe more historical meat to the bone than some of these mystery areas, I think there's been less willingness to kind of explore that here, at the kind of Chamber of Commerce level.
Yeah. Do you get a lot of calls for, houses that are haunted in that area?
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I would say, and now that I'm doing home histories, I would say, there's a significant percentage of clients, as that are curious about the history of the house because they've, had doors closing, or they've heard noises and footsteps and stuff in the upstairs. So, yeah, I think, there's more of that experience happening than I ever realized when I first started out.
Yeah, coming on the second half of this show is going to be Tom Warner. He was in the Unsolved Mysteries Berkshires episode, and his house that he lives in is an old family home. I believe it was built in the early 1800s, which is haunted. So it's interesting that I've got all these stories coming my way from the Berkshire area. That it's either massive UFO sightings, even up to this day, or haunted homes or businesses.
Yeah, and I think and a little bit of the kind of cryptozoology legacy, because it's an area that's it started out very wilderness and was domesticated and clear cut for a long time, and then went back to a point where the county's kind of 80% forested. So we've got these wild man and Bigfoot stories going back to the 1700s, and just kind of this rich, kind of really rich interconnected tapestry.
You said Bigfoot. I just got a story from a gentleman from the Berkshires, a Bigfoot story. So, when you said crypto, zoology, were you talking about Bigfoot, Dogman?
Yeah, we've had a lot of Bigfoot. We had something called Gloacus, which more of a Connecticut monster, but it's been seen out this way. And there's some interesting. There was also a story of a very long serpent in one of our lakes. That's probably more folktale than anything, but.
What lake was that be?
The Twin Lakes. They're called, kind of at the border of Massachusetts and Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, when I did that Berkshire episode a couple of years ago, I reached out for people to send me if you had any experiences, through the Berkshires or that area. And oh my God, I got emails from New York and Connecticut and Pennsylvania, Canada. It was so active around that time. So my question to them and to you is, do you think with the lunar landing in 1969, a lot of people believe it stirred up a lot of activity, or do you think maybe it's more government related?
That's interesting. I'm trying to, I'm definitely not an expert on the, kind of worldwide ufology picture, but just from my local collections, and I've got about maybe 80 sightings, and there are more, but it seems like there was a kind of real uptick in the mid 60s. That I know some ufologists call it like the high strangeness period. You had the books like John Keel's Mothman Prophecies, and things started to get weird a little bit. And more of the accounts of the close encounters of the third, fourth, fifth kind, where people are having conversations and contactees. And so, I think some of it was the loosening of the culture and the proliferation of ideas that people could have and discuss in the 1960s and 70s. It's hard to imagine a lot of the UFO contactee stuff that was coming out in the late 60s being, ever making the news in the 40s and the 50s, in a more straight-laced time. So, I have a tendency, I guess, to see, the cultural anthropological shadings and how it shapes whatever, anything people, any historical event, whether it's UFOs or wars or, but how, the perception of it is at the time. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of sightings here in the, from 65 to 66. And then there was something called the flying silo that was seen a lot, kind of more over the border in Vermont, southern Vermont, but a couple of times in the Berkshires, and that's one of the things too I noticed about the 60s into the 70s is you start to see it changing. It's not all saucers people are reporting anymore. You see these cylinder shaped objects, triangle shaped objects, things like that. So yeah, so at this point it's, the accounts are diversifying in their content. And that's also when we started having we had a major UFO contactee in the Berkshires who started writing for Flying Saucers International around the early 60s and wrote, just hundreds of pages of articles over the course of the 60s about his contacts beginning in the Berkshires with a species he called Carendians. And this involves going on their crafts, underground bases, under local mountains, traveling to their world. So it was kind of like one of the obscure, there was all these small budget UFO magazines in the 60s and 70s, but his sightings were endorsed by a couple of the editors of the time, and he wrote extensively about these contacts. And I believe he still lives in the Berkshires today, but doesn't really do public interviews, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I see a lot of that when I reach out to certain people. They don't want to talk about it, or they still can't talk about it. My wife and I went last month to Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you heard about that crash. In 1965, a UFO crashed in Kecksburg.
Heard of it.
It's pretty interesting. We went there and to the site and talked to a few people. Talked to Stan Gordon, who was a part of the UFO Witness, I believe, and had his own DVD out, which I purchased and he autographed. But anyway, it was very interesting. That incident and the incident happened in my county, in Trumbull County, Ohio, in 1994. And to me, it was a cover up on both these incidences. It wasn't a UFO. The one they said it was in Kecksburg was shaped like an acorn. So if you go there, you can see the replica of the spaceship outside their town. It's a real small village. And the one in our county was several sightings on December 14th, 1994. That actually went national with the Art Bell show in 1999. And then when I had friends of mine that worked for the law department back then, they still couldn't come on my show and talk about it. So you say you do the haunted homes and you do the history of the home So history is important to you on these background checks you do.
Yeah, I'm very interested in getting the record right on whether it's a contemporary event or past events. And yeah, and especially I think as a local historian, when you're dealing with certain content, it might not be the most famous people, so this might be the only treatment that they're going to get, the only thing that will ever be Googleable about their name. I feel it's kind of pressure to get the story right, but it's it's quite difficult to reconstruct the past, and but it can, as a news reporter, it can be quite difficult to reconstruct the present, too. So it's a challenge. It's an ongoing conversation, I think that we have as a community.
What do you actually do to that? I mean, you're not a paranormal investigator, right?
No, I mean, I've done a little bit of it all. I've lost count how many haunted places I've slept in and done reviews on and things like that. But my bread and butter, my day work is kind of any properties, commercial properties, regular homes, just profiling who all the previous owners were, when renovations took place, all the different kind of the stories of their lives, and a lot of times that's profiles like that are required by town bylaws if you want to do certain major renovations or demolish a section or things like that. So some of it's kind of dry, but a lot of I would say most homes have something pretty weird and interesting. I mean, people's lives, even in the kind of the times we think of as mundane, like maybe the 1950s that were quiet, there was still a lot of weird stuff happening in people's lives. So I'm constantly finding houses that were used by bootleggers and, unsolved murders in houses that have worked, and suicides and all kinds of less usual life events.
How do you go about, checking, like, say, the background of the house? I mean, public records or?
Variety. Kind of, you have to come from a couple of different directions. I'll run and trace the deeds. So I'll trace the actual ownership record back through the deeds. Sometimes look at historic maps, and then match it against early street directories and things like that. If the occupants were different from the owners, go through the old newspapers to find out, once I have the names of, like, here's the names of the people who owned it. Now, who were they? Look at census data. So it's pulling together from a lot of different sources to kind of reconstruct, who these people were and what their occupations, what church they went to, what year they immigrated in some cases, and then trace their, and then sometimes, for deluxe cases, and I'll actually trace the genealogy of descendants of past owners for a homeowner, so that I can try to get actual family photos and stuff from their house that were from 150 years ago. That's sort of the holy grails, when you can find, like, here's a picture of your fireplace, like 162 years ago, with the family and at Christmas in front of it. Yeah, I think there's way more interest in that than there used to be. There's a lot more interest in sense of place and getting kind of like a real people's history of, our nation and our regions, that might not be as sanitized as the one we learned as school kids. I think that's big right now.
And you're telling me, before this, the interview, we were talking, you said you have a book coming out?
Later this year, late fall, 2022, be called These Mysterious Hills, an unauthorized history of the Berkshires. And that'll be on my website, thesemysteriousHills.com. It will be the easiest place to get it. And if you're in the Berkshires, I do tours all through mid to late October. I do walking historical tours through my website, and everything from 1920s true crime and bootlegging to ghosts and hauntings. So different themes, different experiences.
I'll put all those links at the bottom of this episode. Any place stand out to you in particular over another? Background checks in some of these haunted homes.
There was an inn that I actually worked at for a while, about a decade ago, in Lenox, Mass, that really sort of impressed me as having a certain vibe, just consistently. It was owned by a woman who was kind of late to the Gilded Age, and she kind of came to the Berkshires after most everybody else, had built their estates and had a house right next to Edith Wharton. But she really put a lot of herself into it. It's all carved, with fertility symbols and the woodwork and things, because she wasn't able to conceive. So there's all this different, from Catholic to pagan symbolism, just kind of really carved right into the walls. And that's just the sort of house where you really feel like close to the person who, lived in it and had it built. Just really imbued. But there's been a lot of incidents there with pregnant women sleeping in the master bedroom. That does not seem to be a welcome thing. So there's been situations that I've witnessed where people had to be, because it's a big wedding inn. So there's occasionally you do get some pregnant women in the master bedroom in the manor house, and it's like, yeah, they've had to be moved to other rooms sometimes.
Well, it sounds like you fell into a really ideal job that suits you, that you enjoy doing.
It stays interesting.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, you know what, Joe? I appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories. I look forward to checking out your new book when it comes out.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, Joe Durwin from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Thank you for sharing your stories. And I will put all of Joe's links at the bottom of this episode. Don't go anywhere. Coming up next is the return visit of Tom Warner from the Berkshires UFO 150 million view episode that was on Unsolved Mysteries, released through Netflix. And I'll be back right after these brief messages.
Ghost stories are always scarier when they're told by the very people who experienced them. Hi, I'm Becky.
And I'm Diana.
And we're the hosts of the Homespun Haints podcast.
We talk to people just like you who've come face to face with ghosts, demons, haints, and other strange paranormal phenomena. All of it makes for a chilling good time.
So grab yourself a sweet tea, turn off the lights, and listen to some eerie, true ghost stories on Homespun Haints, wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm not scared. Are you?
This is Betsy Kulikowski, author of the Veritas Codex series, and you're listening to Ghost in the Valley podcast.
Okay, tonight I have back on the show on a return visit is Tom Warner. Tom is the author of Beyond the Stars. He's a writer, a producer, an artist, a painter, a poet. I found out he's a construction worker. He's also portrayed himself in the Berkshires UFO that was released on July 1st, 2020 on Netflix. It was part of the Unsolved Mystery series. It was based on the real-life UFO abductions that happened in the Berkshire, Great Barrington, on September 1st, 1969. I was very fortunate to have an 8-part series on the Berkshires. Tom Reed and Melanie and Tom Warner were the stars of the series. Basically, they all agreed to come on my show, along with the production crew of Justin Janowitz and Doug Sackman, the director of not only the Berkshires episode, but of 2 other episodes of that Unsolved Mysteries series that year. Marcus Clark also agreed to come on the show. So I was really blessed to have everybody that I reached out to come on the show. And then my very last part of the 8-part series, I reached out for people to write questions and ask both Tom's and Melanie questions that they had on the abductions and also their sightings that they've seen from everywhere from New York and Pennsylvania, Delaware. I mean, it was everywhere that day, not just Massachusetts. But without further ado, let's get right to the show with Tom Warner. And welcome to the show, Tom.
Hal, thanks for having me back on. It's been a while, and actually, it was 53 years ago last night.
Right. I looked at that. So it was kind of like an anniversary when you came on, or yeah, it was, in 2020, we were celebrating with the
51st then.
51st anniversary.
Right.
Exactly. And now we're 53.
53 years.
And what amazes me was, I think we were talking about this earlier, was the total amount of views that the Berkshires UFO had. I mean, well, it's over 150 million views.
Can you imagine 150 million people seeing your mug? It's like, oh my God.
You ever think that would take off like that?
Well, after it was coming out, I was asked, would I be willing to talk? And I said, yeah, of course I would. And they said, they're prepping us, that this is going to be really big. And yet I never realized quite how big it was going to be. And no matter where I go, every single day, there isn't a day that doesn't go by that a stranger doesn't come up to me and ask me questions. And
I know before I asked you, you said you was at a store and some lady came up and, were you in also Unsolved Mystery?
Yeah. It was, what happened was I was in another state. And I just happened to go in a grocery store, and this gentleman was in the line, and he happened to be driving through the same town at the same time. And he goes, "Tom Warner?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "I can't believe it." He says, I watched you on Unsolved Mysteries." I said, "Oh, that's really nice." And he says, "I bought your book." I said, "Oh, well, thank you very much." And I shook his hand, and he goes, I said, "Well, we're in the process of, doing a movie." And he looked at me, he goes, "Well, I was been asked to do that, but my people are they're still alive." In other words, witnesses to something referring to in my book. And he says, "I have to tell you," he said, "Man, your book was spot on, and he goes, "Do you mind if I take a picture for the guys back at work?" I'm like, "Why not?" He says, "They're not going to believe it, but I'm a real person. I'm out here,
For the listeners that don't know, I mean, last time we talked, I had I think 20,000 downloads. Now I have over 60,000. So the people that are still going back and are looking at the old episodes. And as a matter of fact, it was so ironic that today I had a person text me and was asking me about the Berkshires. I thought, well, isn't that weird? I thought maybe Tom Warner's playing a trick on me, and because he don't want to give his name or nothing, because he said he witnessed what you saw. He wasn't abducted, but he said they kind of communicated with him through
telepathy.
It was it was more like the flashing of lights.
Mm-hmm.
They were responding back to his, and he had a flashlight, so he was doing a flashlight, and they were responding. Called his sister out on the porch and said, "Hey, look at this." Naturally, as soon as she came out, the thing took off, But he says, "Oh man, I love the Berkshires." I thought Tom Warner's playing a trick on me.
No, that wasn't me.
I still get questions, So tell people about exactly, like in a nutshell, what happened to you that day.
Well, 53 years ago, about this time, I was over at my neighbor's house, and we're just coloring, playing, and I sat down to color, and I had telepathy, and I called me to this window, and I looked out the window, and I heard this voice right in my head: "You got to go home now." And I'm like, that's it. I was out of there. I said to the girl, I said, "Debbie, I got to go home. I got to go home." I was 10 years old, and she goes, "Is your mother calling you?" I said, "I don't know. Maybe it's God from those clouds." I was raised Catholic. I didn't know what the heck it was, And I bolted out the door, and and then I get into the next room, which was the kitchen, and Debbie's sister Jane was on the phone, and the grandmother was standing over by the sink, and I said, "I gotta go home. I gotta go home." And Jane yelled back, Tommy, what's wrong? What's wrong?" And I said, "I gotta go home." And I'm like running like for dear life. And I run out of the house, and my only thought was, I'm going to get home in probably 5 seconds flat, And all of a sudden, all the sounds disappeared. They're gone. They're just like the katydids, the crickets, everything just vanished. And all of a sudden, everything went into slow motion. It's like I knew something was off to my left. I just felt it. And I turned to my left, and a beam came on me, and my hands jerked back. Boom! I'm on a UFO.
And that's where you seen Melanie. And I think you told me the other day you seen somebody else.
Yeah. What happened first was I'm looking at this like wall, and the first girl, she's like, oh man, I tell you, they're like screaming, crying, whatever. And it hit the third girl, and I looked up, and I just saw this girl, and I put my hand. It was like a material, and I put my hand on the wall, and I said, it's okay, even though I didn't know where the heck I was, And all of a sudden, she let out a blood curdling scream, and I looked to my left, and that's when I saw Melanie, and I didn't know it was Melanie, and I didn't know who this other girl was at the time. I mean, because I was asked before, I said, I didn't recognize anybody except Melanie, which I recognized her once I got into high school. And then as she screamed, I saw Melanie, and Melanie had this horrific expression on her face. I mean, just horrific. And all of a sudden I get the touch on the shoulder, and it was an alien. It was like, oh God,
And she said that, she didn't remember really your face, but she was connected with you.
Yeah, that was, when I saw her in high school the first time we were in high school, and I went to open the door, and she happened to be coming through the other way. And I was like, oh my God, I knew that face right away. And I went and I dropped my books. I ran after her, and someone says, I said, who is that? Who's that? A friend? And they said, Warner, you don't stand a chance, man. You're a freshman. I'm like, that's not why, and it's like, but then I found out who she was, and I just kind of, just had to know who she was. And it wasn't until years later that I was, told that they had an abduction over at Lake Mansfield. And I didn't get to talk to Melanie for years since this is from my freshman year in high school till, so that's like 36, 37 years later. And all of a sudden I just saw Melanie and, oh, how you doing? And so we talked quite a bit. And actually her brother was the one that was supposed to go on the program, and he backed out, and Melanie agreed to do it, which was really good because it was really brave that she did that. It was really terrific. She didn't have to.
Yeah, actually, all three of you, I mean, all of you, not just the three of you, but also Jane Green and all of you, that you did this was a brave thing to do, because this was, before the Pentagon released all these.
Right. Which was really interesting about that, Al. I'll tell you why, because we actually were going to include somebody else in it. And because the UFO, we knew the UFO went from here, but it also went up to Lake Champlain, where I was in Willsboro, New York at the time. And the UFO went from here up to Willsboro. And we know that because some friends eventually told us, yeah, that happened to us the same night. And they were interviewed by the Plattsburgh Air Force Base the next day. So we were going to include the military, and then we turn around, and they kind of declined and everything, but they knew it was coming. And once they knew when the dates were coming, and then they released their video, kind of softened the blow a little bit, I'm sure.
It had to make you feel a little better, though. I mean, because what people say, I was abducted. Right. Even I seen a UFO. I mean,
right.
It's still out there, and I've all these messages that I've got. It's the same thing.
You don't want to talk about it,
and the government doesn't make it easier for you. So they're always covering stuff up.
No, I mean, I've had so many things that happened to me through my lifetime. That's why we're in the process of doing a movie. It was time to tell the entire story, so every step, every interview, I'm okay. A little bit more comes out. And then I wrote my autobiography, and I go, yeah, but there's a little bit more.
That was a good book. I got to tell the people, Beyond the Stars. I'm going to put all the links to the bottom of this episode. It's still available. Go to Amazon, wherever you get your books, and look for Beyond the Stars by Tom Warner. I've got a copy. He was generous enough to put my quotes on the cover. Appreciate that. Thank you.
You're kind enough to say it.
So is there going to be like a Beyond the Stars part 2, or?
No, we're doing a movie, and that's going to be covering everything by that time. So between between the movie and the book, you're gonna know pretty much everything about me.
Yeah, that was my question. What's the movie basically like? The book?
It's based on the book. It's the Beyond the Stars, the Tom Warner story. So
okay, that's the movie.
Yeah, it's in the process. It's a slow process. You know, I mean, I've originally, people wanted to do the screenplay, but how someone else write a story about you through your eyes? I just had to do it myself. So I wasn't a screenwriter or anything, but I'm darn close to it right now.
Yeah, that's like my book. I wanted to come out last year, and I'm looking at next year because it's a true story, and I'm trying to really put the actual facts in there, along with. So I'm going to label under fiction because there's a couple things in there that, but it's 98% true, and you would think, oh, I know where the false ones are. No, you won't. Because of the little things is the false ones, And I told, like my wife says, all that shit happened to you, and I'm like, yes, it did. I mean,
right. And she's still with you. That's really good.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, I could give her a medal for that.
Yeah, right.
The movie, another year or two.
Yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah, but it's a slow process. But I can't go into too much detail about it. But I just felt like I had to tell the entire story, because the Berkshire UFO was about one night, but that was one night. But I've had so many experiences that every time what people don't know was 2 weeks after the September 1st incident, I was abducted a second time, and that was witnessed as well. I was eyewitnessed on 2 different occasions on 2 different UFOs in a 2-week period. How do you go about your life after this stuff happens? It's like, it's so surreal, but yet when it drops in front of you, it's there, and you have to come to grips with it and stuff. And I did this. The only reason I came forward, Al, was to help other people. I mean, I've had so many people call.
Just you guys coming forward of emails just off the Berkshires. Because they could come forward now with their story that they could never have said before.
Right. Well,
especially with the
telepathy.
That was alone was huge.
Right. I had telepathy since I was 4 years old, and it's like, how did I remember being young and talking about this, and it wasn't. And as time went on, I'd actually have this happen, and someone would realize that I was communicating through my mind to their mind to my mind, and they'd be like, whoa, and then I'd have to admit, some things that I had a close UFO encounter, and it's like some people ran away, and others didn't, but I didn't advertise it or anything, and I didn't want to go forward with it. And once Unsolved Mysteries called me, I still wasn't going to do it. But once I was convinced that they were going to tell the whole story of that night, I didn't care if they told the whole story of my life. I wanted them to tell the whole story of that night, because it was being portrayed that it was about one person, and nothing could have been further from the truth about that.
No, I thought it was just phenomenal the way it opened up with Jane Green.
Phenomenal woman.
I thought that it was just very well done. I told Marcus Clark that. I said, yeah, it was very well done. And I was just surprised a lot of things that weren't put in the episode, especially the creating of I don't know if you knew that about the spaceship they were building for the episode.
Never knew about it.
Really?
No.
Yeah, they were putting together and I forget how many $100,000 they were putting into this thing
to do something.
Right, because you and Melanie were talking about being on that craft and what you've seen, and I came from. I can't remember. I have to go back and
the notes. I was completely unaware of that.
It wasn't by Marcus. It was by either Doug Sackman or Janowitz.
Right.
So I don't know which one. I can't remember, but they were talking about they were building the craft and they ditched it at the last minute.
Really? See, I never knew that.
Really, and So. There was little things that were, like Marcus Clark said, we filmed a lot, even with you. Like there was a lot that was cut out from each and every one of you.
Right.
He says, and that's out of his control. Once everything goes back to the cutting floor, it's like maybe an opinion what should go in or not, but he says that's beyond his control.
They had so much. They had to just tell a story of that night, and I think they did a really good job on that.
With 150 million views, it was the #1 show for the summer, and I believe going into the end of the year, it was top of the Netflix charts.
When I was told it was in 178 countries, Al, I didn't even know there was 178 countries. I went on Google, how many countries? Oh, there are 190 something, and we're currently in 178 countries.
And there's still incidences of UFOs going through the Berkshires.
Oh yeah. We have some surprises up our sleeve for the movie.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not like nothing happened after that. Like I was telling you before, I think I sent you the pictures where I was on doing an interview with Coast to Coast, and I sent the pictures. And what happened was a friend asked me, could I bring him down to the Bridge restaurant, which was at the bridge where Tom Reed had his encounter. I was okay, and we're driving down, and he says, I think I saw a UFO. I said, stop it. I'm trying to drive here. I don't want to look up. If it drops in front of me, that's one thing. But if it's off to the side, I gotta drive. That's it. So I drop him off, and I'm going home, and I see this lighting up in the sky. I'm like, concentrate, drive. And then I got about a mile from my house, and all of a sudden I had that telepathy again, and I just said, if that's you, leave me a sign when I get home. And I pulled in my driveway, and I have my phone with me. And I look, and there's an orb about the size of a grapefruit, green orb. And it's sitting up in my lilac tree. And I just had my picture, and I just kept hitting photo. I just kept taking pictures. And it went from the lilac tree onto the house, to the base of the house. And then it started coming forward. And I'm like, now I'm taking pictures as fast as my little thumb can print. And all of a sudden I went right into me. And I put those pictures up there, and it's like, they're out there.
Yeah.
I mean, what is it? I don't know.
I just went to a gentleman's house today. It was about 45 miles from my house. It took me about an hour to get there. He had a haunted house, and I went to do a walkthrough through his house and ask him questions. And he also had witnessed 2 UFO sightings in his life. So we were talking. I thought I'd ask you the same question. I was asking him, do you think that what you've seen, what you're describing to me, is man-made, or is it from some other dimension out there? And he says, well, if it's man-made and it's not ours, we have a huge problem, because the way this thing was traveling, that went from point 1 to point 0 out of space in a blink of an eye, had to be going like 60,000 miles an hour. He doesn't know any craft that could go that fast or maneuver zigzag and do all that. So
the UFO that night, when it went across Lake Champlain, we figured out that it was going at a slow cruise at 26,000 miles an hour, based on from where it went from point A to point B in 1 second. We figured it was just about 26,000 miles an hour. I mean, just incredible. And do I think it's from here? No, not at all. And in fact, that's the whole, I get to that in some of these complex questions in my movie. It was time because I get asked a lot of these things. And
yeah, I mean, for the government to do a mental telepathy on you has to be
No. These all this stuff goes back to the government's been involved in this since from way back, even World War II, and they had all these programs, and they're top secret programs, and they wanted to know about why children had telepathy abilities.
Yeah, that's a good, interesting question. Yeah, I mean, or do you think somehow that a UFO is connected with Bigfoot? I mean, I've been asked that numerous times.
No, I think Bigfoot's just something that's here. I mean, I've never seen a Bigfoot. I hope I don't. You know, I'd rather see an alien than a Bigfoot. You know, it's like,
I was talking to another paranormal investigator, and he was talking about how wherever you see, and if you do the check this out, that usually wherever you see Bigfoot, there was a UFO sighting or it was around water. Now that the Pentagon's saying that you have the submergible
right.
craft.
Well, up on Lake Champlain the year before that, they said the UFO went underwater and came out of the lake.
Mm-hmm.
And that was reported in 1968.
And that's in my book, and that's in my book also from 1970 about
coming into the water. You know,
all the water in our river.
And how do you know? How do you know that they're just not sitting at the base of the ocean and they just sit there and do what the hell they want? And they're already here,
right? Or how long have they been here? You know.
Oh, I think for a long time. I mean, you can go back in history and, different civilizations and see, things that they described. And the question, that I get posed the most is, well, why me? And, I just, one of many, a messenger, and getting the message out, what this all means. And it's very complex, and it goes to every aspect of government, everything you can imagine. But the one thing I didn't want to do, Al, is I didn't want to be one of these guys that went from, to UFO conventions and things like that.
I was going to ask you that if you had an agent that would.
Will I give speeches? I don't have a problem giving a speech. I don't have a problem with that. But, I just felt that there's enough out there that where people, they want to promote themselves. And I didn't do this for myself. I did this to help other people. And and so for me, the best way for me to tell the story and have control of the story was to write my own screenplay and have it put into a movie and tell everything. And that's the best way to do it. And that's the best way to communicate to those who want to know these deep questions. And that's the only way I can do it. I can't do it through one interview or when the Unsolved Mysteries came out, I was asked to do so many, and I finally said, nope. Once I committed to doing a movie, that was it. In fact, you're the only interview I've done.
I appreciate that.
And this is really a follow-up. It's not getting into details of anything, really.
Right. It's a follow-up and basically what's happened to you in the past 2 years. I mean, how has your life changed since the Unsolved?
Well, I think the strangest thing about it is being recognized wherever you go. I mean, wherever you go. I mean, I get calls from Italy. I get calls from messages all over the world. I've done interviews out of Greece. I did an interview out of Ukraine, Kiev, Ukraine, which was really interesting because it was being broadcast back to Russia at the time. I said, "Oh, this is back to Russia. This is my golden opportunity to tell Vladimir Putin what I really think."
Yeah.
And I said, "I think he's going to invade." I said, "This was a year before." I said, "He's going to invade." And I said that true leaders lead through peace, and they lead people to peace and prosperity. When you lead to war and destruction, that's not a leader. I brought that up, and in my interview was canned. It never got aired. And every single email I had to them and they had to me was deleted out of my Gmail account like it never happened.
Yeah, that's not something.
Everything. Like, it's like, oh, we're going into your Gmail account. We're going to delete all our emails like you never spoke. And that was it. And that's when I went like, nah, I got to just do a movie. That was it. No, I could never find the interview, but it was like, so that's when I said, no, the best thing to do is just go ahead, do your movie, do the story, get it out there, and hopefully that'll help people. And that's all that matters. I mean, it's just helping people.
What's on the plans for the future? I know the movie's taking up a lot of your time.
Right. Well, after the movie's done, I may be in another movie, and there's 2 other movies I'd like to help produce, just to help stories get out there. They'll be very powerful movies. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, this is a new business for me.
And you can always reach out to Doug Zachman or Justin Jenowitz, because they're also directing, and
they're also directing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I have friends in Hollywood, and a number of people wanted to get involved in everything. So
and everybody's fighting for streaming rights now. Gone are the days with NBC, ABC, CBS.
Oh, it's everything.
Yeah,
you can be off of one and back on in another. It's a crazy business. Crazy business. So after that, I still want to get my poetry book out. Yeah, I mean, there's some personal things.
You got great poetry. I got to tell you that.
Oh, thank you. And my artwork's not too shabby either.
Oh yeah. You got that painting out from the book. Where you were selling that, I believe.
Right, but I was actually named the American Gallery Greatest American Painters. So it's worth a cup of coffee right there.
Well, I'll buy you a cup of coffee once we come to the Berkshires.
I sent your invitation to the Warner homestead. It's still open for you, Al.
We're coming. I don't know if it's going to be this year. It's looking more like next year with
might have to bring a couple haunted places too, Al.
Well, you got one right there at your
right my house,
right?
But they're my relatives, Al. Don't be bothered by them.
Right.
We're the only people that lived in this house since 1835. I mean.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show today and sharing your update. We look forward for the movie coming out. That's going to be great.
I will keep you posted, Al. It's a long process. I mean, it really is. I mean, when we went to do Unsolved Mysteries, I believe it was going to get done until all of a sudden this crew came in. There was like 30 to 50 people at my house ready to film. I'm like, okay, I guess we're going to go.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it.
Well, Al, it's always great talking to you. And thank you for, having me back to say hello. And I look forward to you coming to the Berkshires. Thank you, sir.
I want to thank Tom Warner and Joe Durwin. Thank you, Tom Warner, for coming back on the show and giving me an update, what's going on with you and inside the Berkshires these past 2 years. It's always a pleasure having you on the show. And thank you, Joe Durwin, journalist from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. I can't wait to get to the Berkshires and visit Sheffield and Great Barrington and Pittsfield. I got a ton of places I want to go. Hopefully I get to meet all the people that I have contacted over the last couple of years. Again, thank you. Next week, don't miss the episode that happened in my county in 1994 in Trumbull County, Ohio. Went over 10 cities and bureaus and state patrol and sheriff's, city police chased these UFOs from Trumbull County into Pennsylvania. Yeah, but tune in next week. UFOs over Trumbull County, Ohio. I'm your host, Al Cooley, Ghosts in the Valley podcast.